Loest is the weakest healer who only knows how to use one basic heal spell, and because of this, he gets exiled from his party, and that makes everyone around him brand him as an ignorant loser. But they had no idea that he was hiding a power unlike anything they ever seen. So what will happen when the weakest healer turns out to be the strongest adventurer of all? The story starts with a young girl left stranded after a bunch of goblins attack the carriage she's riding in. Just as the goblins are about to finish her off, a mysterious boy shows up out of nowhere to save her. Fast forward a few years, and our protagonist Louis is asked if he'd like to join a girl's party. Everyone around loses their minds when they hear that this girl actually wants to team up with him. Louis himself is shocked, but the girl points to his sign, clearly advertising for party members. This girl is not backing down. She insists on joining him and proudly declares she's a martial artist. Louis then awkwardly introduces himself as a sort of healer. But before things can go any further, an Adventurers Guild employee named Amherst rushes over, ready to stop this girl from making the biggest mistake of her life. Amherst then reveals that this guy has earned himself the nickname the Incompetent Lowest. Sure, he's a healer, but the dude only knows the most basic spell called Heal. He's just another labyrinth orphan like many others who lost their parents and had to become adventurers to survive. But even after all these years, Lois can't even cast an area heal or anything higher than the beginner spell, so he's infamous for being a complete joke. But despite his reputation, Lois somehow managed to join a party called Lightning Sword until they kicked him out recently for not knowing detoxification magic. Word has spread, and now nobody wants him in their parties because, well, he's totally useless. Amherst, still trying to protect the girl, warns that if she parties up with Lois, she'll never make any money. But the girl Naru casually drops that she's already loaded. Amherst freaks out when she sees just how much cash Naru is lugging around, quickly explaining that most of the adventurers in this town are basically gangsters. The crowd of tough-looking folks around them proves her point, and she warns Naru to never flash that kind of money. Naru politely thanks her, and Amherst immediately realizes this girl is a total newbie to adventuring. So in true hustler fashion, Amherst offers to introduce her to a beginner's party, of course for a fee. But Naru shocks everyone when she flat out refuses because she's been dying to join Lois' party for a really long time. Lois and Naru then head out to sign some papers to make their party official, but Naru's practically burning holes in Lois' skull with her stare. For some reason, she's got this weird admiration for him, and meeting him again feels like a relief. Then the little oddball gets totally thrown off when Lois tells her to sign her name, but she quickly pulls herself together. Lois covers the guild fee, and just like that, their party is now officially. Once outside, Lois starts rambling about how no one's ever reached the deepest part of the Mardet Labyrinth. It's still shrouded in mystery, and no one even has a clue who or what the final boss is. Adventurers flock to Mardet City, hoping to strike gold, turning it into one of the biggest cities in the nation. Lois, being the psycho he is, wants to dive straight into the labyrinth right this second. Meanwhile, Naru's wondering if that's even remotely a good idea, considering their party is barely a few hours old. And also, before they left, Amherst gave Lois the heads up Naru's a newbie, so he should only take her to the grasslands for now. The labyrinth leaks magic power, spawning monsters in certain areas, and the grasslands are one of those spots. Thankfully, only weak monsters show up there. It's supposed to be the perfect training ground for rookies, but it's also annoyingly huge, making it hard to find anything to fight. The labyrinth, on the other hand, is jam-packed with creatures, and that's exactly what Louis is itching for. He reassures Naru they'll be fine as long as they don't wander too deep, and if things go south, he's got it under control. His confidence is pretty wild for a healer, but he brushes it off like it's no big deal, and they press on. When they arrive, Naru insists on taking the lead. After all, she's a martial artist, so it makes sense for Lois to back her up as the healer. Lois is all for her confidence, but he can't help but wonder if she can actually fight. Naru quickly shuts down any doubts as she demolishes a group of goblins, and Lois is genuinely impressed. He explains that adventurers make their living by selling the magic stones monsters drop, and the guild buys them because they're valuable for all sorts of things. But he adds that she should already know this, even as a beginner. Sadly, goblin magic stones aren't worth much, so if they want to make real money, they'll need to take down stronger monsters. They both agree to go deeper into the dungeon for better loot, and Naru even vows to protect the fragile healer if anything goes wrong. Not long after, it's actually Lois saving her when he stops her from stepping on a trap. He shows her where she almost met her maker and explains that he spotted the trap thanks to the different colored tiles. Usually spotting traps is a thief's job, so Naru is baffled and asks how Lois did it as a healer. Lois casually replies that he's been an adventurer for a long time, so he's picked up a few tricks along the way. As they venture deeper, they come across a half-orc, which shouldn't be on this level of the dungeon. Half-orcs are mid-level demons, and their tough hulking bodies make them a real challenge to defeat. Their strength is on par with monsters from the lower levels, so seeing one appear is definitely not normal. Naru's instincts tell her to turn tail and run, but Lois is convinced they can take it down if they work together. He doesn't want to push her into it, but to his surprise, she agrees because she trusts his judgment. Naru then kicks off the fight, but she's shocked when her first attack feels like she's kicking a brick wall. The beast may be slow, but Naru still takes a hit and things quickly go downhill. She finds herself cornered, the fight turning against her, but strangely the half-orc doesn't finish her off. Just then, Naru's eyes widen in disbelief as Lois comes out of nowhere, driving his sword right into the orc's chest, saving her at the last second. Lois is relieved that Naru's okay, but she can't help but wonder if this guy is really just a healer. Lois, as usual, brushes it off, explaining that his years as an adventurer taught him a few close combat tricks. Naru, still skeptical, points out that his attack didn't exactly look like a simple trick, but Lois distracts her by knowing that she's injured. Naru tries to shrug it off, claiming it's no big deal, but Lois' healer instincts kick in. He knows even the smallest wounds need proper attention. Naru insists she's fine, but Lois heals her anyway, not taking no for an answer. The magic stone left behind by the orc is much larger than the goblin's stones and packed with way more magic power, meaning it'll fetch a nice price. Lois, satisfied with what he's seen from Naru's fighting skills, suggests they've earned enough money and can call it a day. Whatever the fighter, Naru insists she can still go on, so the two continue, ready for more hunting. Later, Amherst is floored when she sees how many monsters Lois and Naru took down in just one day, so she quickly realizes Lois must have dragged the newbie into the labyrinth, and to make matters worse, the fact that they brought back an orc stone means he took her to the middle level. But Lois corrects her, saying they only went to the upper level. The orcs shouldn't have been there, but this lines up with what other adventurers have been saying. The higher-ups have been scrambling lately, so Amherst starts thinking something big might be happening in the labyrinth. Her mood quickly shifts, though, as she's more than happy to pay them for their haul. Naru's weirded out by how excited Amherst is, so Lotus explains that guild employees get a pay raise when they buy magic stones, but only from the adventurers they're in charge of. The more Lois and Naru earn, the more Amherst gets paid. Lois, is still shocked by the size of the payout, has to be reminded by Amherst to split it with Naru. Lois would never forget, but he's stunned because even after splitting it, it's still 10 times more than he's ever made before. That realization hits him hard, and Lois sinks into a deep depression. Amherst steps in to explain to Naru that Lois had been completely swindled while in the Lightning Sword party. They never gave him his fair share of the rewards. Naru's absolutely furious when she hears this, and she demands that the guild do something about it. But the decision is up to Lois, and he chooses to let it go. He's happy with his new party, and just wants to forget the past. As they leave, a mysterious man watches them from the shadows. Later, the greedy Amherst is counting her hard-earned cash, but she's startled when the man appears. It's Handsome, her boss, and he's worried she might have helped Lois find a new party. Amherst brushes it off, saying she doesn't have some magical power of persuasion strong enough to convince someone to join Lois's party. Instead, she explains there was just this girl who saw something special in him. Handsome seems to know who this blue-haired girl is, but for some reason, it clearly troubles him. That night, Lois is shocked to find out that word of him getting a new party member has already spread like wildfire across the city. Apparently, the notoriously incompetent Lois picking up some poor fool to join his party is big news. Lois then moves to reserve a room, and Naru is flustered at the idea of sharing one with him. Lois quickly decides they should sleep in separate rooms, but this seems to leave Naru a little disappointed. They go into their rooms for the night, and Naru's thoughts drift back to when she was healed. Turns out Naru was the girl from the carriage, and Lois was the guy who rescued her. After he healed her, she was so grateful. But Lois, in typical fashion, apologized for not being able to do more. Despite all that, Naru stayed weirdly optimistic, even though the goblins probably massacred everyone else in the carriage. She didn't seem to care and just swore she'd become an adventurer. From that day on, Naru was dead set on joining Lois' party, promising to protect him. Since then, Naru's been training like crazy, waiting for a chance to be by Lois' side. Then the moment she heard that Lois got booted from his party, she rushed straight to the city. The little stalkers, thrilled her plan worked perfectly. Not only did she form a party with Lois, but they even took down an orc together. She's doing everything for him, so it crushes her when she realizes he didn't even recognize who she was. It makes sense though, her appearance has changed so much since then. But that's not the only thing that's different. Lois is way stronger than she remembers, and it doesn't seem like he even needs her protection anymore. Snapping herself out of it, Naru reminds herself of her promise to protect Lois no matter what. She then re-energized to get ready for bed, but one thing still bugs her. How in the world do people call Lois incompetent when he's actually insanely powerful? The story then flashes back to Lois fighting a Hydra alongside his old party. It's clear they're struggling badly. The party's thief is injured, and Lois uses his healing spell on her. She asks him if it can cure poisons, and he explains that it can't, but if he boosts her physical strength, she'll be able to fight off the poison on her own. The thief isn't thrilled and complains about it, but before she can finish, their arrogant leader cuts in, demanding they stop whining and get back into the fight once she's healed. The thief is fed up and snaps at the moron of a leader, telling him she's in no shape to fight, so the leader turns to Lois and orders him to take care of her. Lois is already frustrated and reminds the leader that he told him to bring antidotes for this exact situation. Of course, the leader had been too cheap to buy them, complaining they were too expensive. Now, in typical fashion, he blames Lois for not being able to do more, even accusing him of being a useless healer who can only cast basic healing spells. The leader then desperately yells at their terrified magician Armia to cast a spell, so she shakingly manages to fire off a fireball, but doesn't do shit against the Hydra. At this point, the leader is fed up, thinking his whole team is pathetic. Realizing they're completely outmatched, he chickens out and orders a retreat, running away like a coward. Armia follows him, and Lois is left to help Siberia escape by supporting her on his shoulder. The next day, instead of reflecting on their own mistakes, the party blames Lois for their failure and kicks him out. Lois is completely taken aback by that shit. Then Siberia is also accusing him of being the reason they couldn't beat the Hydra. But Lois calmly points out the real reason. They stayed up partying until dawn, so neither the leader nor Siberia were at their best during the battle. The leader, now feeling attacked, asks if Lois is blaming them. Lois insists he's not, but they all turn to Armia for the final word. But the leader gives her intimidated looks, so she buckles under the pressure and throws Lois under the bus by pointing the deadly finger at his sorry ass. We then learn that Lois was dreaming about the past and wakes up shaken. He reflects that maybe this incident bothered him more than he realized, considering it's still haunting his dreams. He grabs some water, thinking back to a similar situation from years ago. It was 6 years ago, and even then, he had already earned a reputation as an ignoramus. But despite that, he still held onto the dream of becoming a first-grade adventurer. That's when a party reached out to him offering him a spot, and Lois, eager for the chance, jumped right in. But they didn't bring him on as a healer. They used him as bait. They tossed him in front of monsters, expecting him to draw their attention while they stood back. Lois dodged their attacks, running for his life, and though he was used to being treated like this because after all, he was a labyrinth orphan, but it still got under his skin. Eventually, the monsters grew bored of him and turned on the rest of his party, killing all of them. Lois somehow managed to escape, but the sting of never being treated as a real adventurer stuck with him. It was then while wandering that he came across a group of goblins attacking a carriage, and beside it, a girl was hiding from the monsters. Even now, Lois isn't sure why he decided to help her. He fought the goblins, thinking maybe, just maybe, his worthless life could be traded to save hers, and that would at least give his death some meaning. But he wasn't strong enough, and the monsters knocked him out cold. When he regained consciousness, he saw the girl standing over him, relieved that he was awake. She explained that the Order of the Knights had arrived in time to save her, and Lois, feeling utterly useless, thought to himself that he truly was an idiot because he couldn't even save one girl. But to his surprise, she thanked him, saying that if it weren't for his help, the Knights wouldn't have arrived in time. She even told him that he looked cool while fighting, though Lois found it hard to believe. Noticing she was hurt, his instincts kicked in and he quickly used his healing spell on her. She thanked him again, and he replied that healing was all he could do. He then opened up to her about how his own party had used him as nothing more than bait. The girl was heartbroken when she heard how Lois had been treated like living bait, and she started crying for him. Then her tears quickly turned into determination, and she vowed that when she grew up, she would become an adventurer and join his party, and promised to protect him. Lois was touched by her words, but as she left with the Knights, he knew deep down that she was probably from a noble family, and that the chances of her becoming an adventurer, let alone joining his party, were slim. But her words gave him the courage he desperately needed, and with renewed hope, he decided to give adventuring another shot. Motivated by her promise, Lois sought out mentors who trained him in swordplay and magic. Though he was still primarily a healer and could only use his heal spell, he worked hard to master other skills, pushing himself beyond what he thought was possible. After completing his training, he finally found a new party to join, the Blades of Lightning. Looking back, it made sense why that dream resurfaced. He realized that if it weren't for that girl's words, he wouldn't be where he was now. And had he given up back then, he'd never have had the chance to see her again. Just as Lois reflects on this, Naru knocks on his door, asking if he wants to grab breakfast. Lois agrees, and they head out together. The scene then shifts to them in the labyrinth, where Lois announces they'll be heading to the lower levels today. Later, they find themselves standing in front of a teleportation circle. Naru excitedly mentions that she's never seen one before, so Lois explains that these circles aren't found in every labyrinth. This one was placed by a magician shortly after the labyrinth was discovered, but Uni doesn't know much more about it. Naru, then thinking of the possibilities, says it would be great if they could use it to teleport anywhere, but Lois clarifies that they can only use this circle to teleport to another circle. Naru then muses that it would have been a lot easier if the city had a teleportation circle, so she guesses they didn't install one in the city for fear that monsters might swarm in. Lois corrects her, explaining that monsters can't use these circles, but the real problem is that the knowledge to create new ones was lost centuries ago, so there's no way to make them anymore. They then activate the circle and teleport to the middle levels, and when they arrive, Lois warns Naru that the monsters here are stronger than those they fought before, urging her to stay alert and be careful. The scene shifts to Lois and Naru in the thick of battle against a group of monsters. Lois quickly dispatches his share, but when Naru lands a punch on one of the creatures, her fist goes right through its body like it's made of air. She confusedly looks to Lois, who tells her it's a lich, a monster made of pure spirit energy. It has no physical form, so normal attacks won't work on it. Naru, realizing he's right as she can see through the lich's body, listens as Lois advises they retreat since neither of them can use magic, putting them in a serious disadvantage. But Naru confidently mentions she can handle it, and Lois immediately understands what she's hinting at. We then see Lois skillfully drawing the lich's attention, giving Naru time to prepare her attack. As Lois runs, he explains that with enough training, people can control their prana, and it's an inner spirit energy, and they use it to fight spiritual beings like the lich. Then we see Naru infuse her fist with prana, and with one devastating punch, she obliterates the lich. She celebrates her victory, but Lois quickly notices that she's injured. Realizing she must have gotten hurt where she landed her attack, he pulls out a magic item and uses it to cast a healing spell on her. He explains that this particular item enhances healing spells thanks to the magic stone embedded inside. Lois goes on to tell her that the guild collects magic stones from adventurers, hands them over to craftsmen, who then forge them into magic items and return them to the adventurers. After Naru is fully healed, she asks Lois how much the magic stone they found is worth, and Lois estimates that it could fetch a good price. They then sell the stone to Amers, who pays them generously for it. On their way back to the inn, Lois is pleasantly surprised by how much they earn from the sale. As they stroll through the streets, they notice a commotion, so they curiously move in closer to get a better look, and they see two adventurers in the middle of a heated argument, looking like they're about to throw hands. Lois then tells Naru that fights like this have become pretty common around here lately, and he explains that adventurers who've caused trouble elsewhere have been flocking to this town recently. Naru recalls that Amherst mentioned something similar, and as they look around, they see rough-looking adventurers everywhere. Lois sighs, thinking it's become a real pain in the neck for the more respectable adventurers, but he quickly shifts the conversation, suggesting they treat themselves to something fancy since they've just been paid. The scene cuts to them at the inn enjoying a lavish meal. The innkeeper looks a bit nervous, wondering if Lois can actually cover the cost of all of this, but Lois grins, reassuring her not to worry as he orders some ale. Naru, not wanting to be left out, asks for ale too, but she's immediately denied, told she's too young to drink, so she huffs, clearly not happy about being treated like a kid. Then once they finish eating, Naru asks Lois about a strange tower she's noticed at the edge of town. She's seen similar structures popping up all over the city. Lois admits it's odd and tells her that he once got curious and asked the builders about it. To his surprise, even they didn't know who commissioned the towers or why. Naru, wide-eyed, is shocked, and Lois explains further. The builder was hired by an agent, who was representing another agent, and so on. It's a long chain of middlemen, and whoever's really behind it doesn't want to be found. Lois shrugs it off, saying it doesn't really matter as long as no one's getting hurt. To him, it's just a sign that there are plenty of strange people in the world, and he jokingly adds that they'd be better off building a wall around the city instead of these mysterious towers. Naru, thinking it over, points out that the city doesn't even have a wall. She admits she likes how open it feels, but Lois brings up a good point. It could be a real problem if war broke out, so he asks her how they'd stop invaders. But without hesitation, Naru replies that with so many adventurers around, there's no need to worry. They'll protect the city from anything that comes their way. Lois agrees with her, and with that, the two of them head off to their room for the night. But before Lois enters his room, Naru tries to stop him, clearly wanting to say something, but the words just won't come out. Instead, she awkwardly wishes him a good night. Once in her room, she lies on her bed, thinking about how much she wishes she had the courage to ask to stay in Lois' room, but she just can't bring herself to say it. Meanwhile, Lois lies in his own bed, feeling grateful to be part of a party again. He's unsure if he'll ever see that little girl from his past, but thanks to Naru, he feels like he can keep adventuring for a while longer. The scene then cuts to the Blades of Lightning. Their leader Margulis introduces the party's new healer Lyra, but she doesn't get the warmest welcome from the other members, which makes her feel a little uneasy. Still, Margulis is confident that with this new team, they'll finally be able to defeat the Hydra. Next, the scene shifts to a dark and eerie place. Handsome is seen informing someone that the sleeping princess is currently in the city and has formed a party with Lois, pretending to be just another adventurer. The old man he's speaking to is surprised to hear Lois is still in town, Sophie remarks that they need to get rid of him as time is running out, and Handsome agrees as they plot their next move. Then we see that the party heads back to the swamp to face the Hydra, and luckily the beast hasn't regrown its heads yet, so it won't be as much of a nightmare to deal with. Margulis then quickly lays out a plan. He and Lyra will attack from the front, Armia will provide magic support, and Siberia will sneak up from behind for a surprise strike. He's all set to charge in when Lyra suddenly calls a timeout, flat out refusing to be on the front lines because after all she's a healer, not a tank. Margulis is baffled and says that Lois, their last healer, fought right alongside them in the thick of battle. Lyra is stunned because she can't believe that they made a healer to be with them on the front line, but Lois never seemed to mind. In fact, Siberia chimes in, recalling that Lois got some killer hits in, even being the one who chopped off one of the Hydra's heads. Lyra is still in disbelief, but Margulis quickly reassures her because he doesn't expect her to pull off anything crazy like that. And if she says she can't handle the front lines, that's totally fine. But to be sure, he asks if she can at least cast Detoxify to counter the Hydra's poison, and that Lyra can definitely do. So with that settled, Margulis orders everyone into position because it's time to slay the Hydra once and for all. Meanwhile, back in town, Lois and Naru have just returned from another successful trip into the labyrinth, and Amherst is happy to see they've brought back a haul of gems to sell. Still, she can't help but remind Lois not to push Naru too hard, considering she's still a newbie adventurer. Lois reassures her, saying he's being careful about the fights they get into. Amherst is relieved to hear it, but she points out that a two-person party has its limits, so she suggests that they think about recruiting more members to make things easier. Lois agrees that a bigger party would lighten the load, but ultimately, he decides it's not worth the hassle because he and Naru are already raking in the cash as they are. Amherst admits he's got a point, considering how much they've been making, and even they could probably rent a house instead of staying at the inn if they really wanted to. Naru had no clue you could actually rent a house in the city, so Amherst explains there's only so much gear and loot you can stash at an inn. But when you've got a private room, storage isn't an issue, though it comes with a hefty price tag. But then she adds with a smirk that the real perk is the extra privacy. Especially if you've got a male and female party, let's just say late-night activities become a lot more convenient. For some reason, Maru suddenly seems very interested in renting a private house, but when Amherst notices Lois' lack of reaction, she figures late-night activities aren't on the table for them. Speaking of private houses, Lois recalls that Lightning Blade had one too, although not so glamorous for him because they made him sleep in the storage closet, which was about as comfortable as it sounds. Amherst then laughs at how badly Lois got treated, but she gives him a silver lining. Getting kicked out of Lightning Blade was probably the best thing that ever happened to him because since he left, Margulis and his crew haven't completed a single mission. Then we see Margulis wondering why he can't figure out why they've been failing, but Lyra knows exactly why. He's too thick to realize he's not strong enough to take on a Hydra head-on. Margulis overhears her, and he's about to start shouting, but Lyra shuts him down, telling him to be quiet so she can focus on healing Armia. Armia was seriously injured and poisoned, and Lyra needs all the concentration she can get. While Lyra works, Siberia admits to Margulis, though she hates to say it, that Lois might have been more valuable than they gave him credit for. Sure, he sucked at healing, but he always got the job done in the end. Plus, he never noticed they were scamming him out of his pay, making him the perfect party member. Margulis, now wishing Lois hadn't quit, needs a reminder from Siberia that he was the one who kicked Lois out, and made a big scene while doing it too. Margulis had completely forgotten about that, but now that he remembers, he figures getting Lois back should be easy. All they need to do is ask, and Margulis is sure Lois will come running back. After all, who would turn down the chance to rejoin the famous Blades of Lightning? Though Siberia is starting to wonder if she even wants to stay in the party at this point. By the next morning, Lyra finally finishes healing Armia. Armia then wakes up and thanks her for the help, but Lyra is just glad she could do something useful. She then checks if Armia feels well enough to eat, and when Armia says she does, Lyra heads downstairs to grab some food. However, once she gets down there and asks where the food is stored, she realizes Siberia and Margulis are nowhere to be found, leaving her completely clueless about where they might have gone. Meanwhile, Margulis and Siberia are at the guild, and of course Margulis is making a scene, and he loudly declares that he's willing to let Lois graciously return to his party. Once more, the entire room freezes in disbelief, with Lois being the most shocked of all. He then asks Margulis to repeat himself, because surely no one could say something that stupid. Margulis repeats himself, so Lois' ears weren't deceiving him. And now Lois is just not sure how to even respond to such an idiotic offer. At the same time, Naru and Amherst witness the spectacle. Amherst explains to Naru that the loud blonde guy is the same genius who kicked Lois out of his party, and now he's trying to bring him back with this condescending nonsense. Lois is visibly unamused by Margulis' pompous speech, but before he can speak, Margulis cuts in, assuming Lois might still be bitter about being scammed out of his pay while in their party. Margulis, in his usual clueless fashion, apologizes and pretends it was all just an innocent mistake, and he promises that this time, Lois will get his fair share. Besides, they really need him now since the new healer is pretty much useless in a fight. Siberia watches in disbelief, sure that Lois would never agree to this absurd request. But to her complete shock, Lois actually thanks Margulis for the offer. Naru, furious at the thought of Lois being snatched away, storms in front of him and starts yelling at Margulis, telling him there's no way Lois will ever join their party again. Lois gently touches her shoulder, calming her down and reassures Naru she has nothing to worry about because he's not going anywhere. He then turns to Margulis and says that he was only being polite when he said thanks, but he has zero interest in rejoining his party ever. Margulis can't believe he just got turned down, so he starts scrambling, accusing Naru of trying to keep Lois for herself because she finally realized how valuable he is. The guy's aggressive finger-pointing is starting to seriously irritate Lois, so he grabs Margulis by the wrist, leans in and flatly warns him that if he ever so much as thinks about hurting Naru, he'll end up with a body so mangled even his own mother wouldn't recognize him. With that, Lois turns to leave, and Naru, never one to miss a chance, takes a second to rub it in Margulis' face. After they walked out, Margulis is left standing there, clueless and pissed off. He still wants to take down the Hydra though, so he shouts at Amherst, demanding she recommend a new adventurer for his party, preferably one who can actually handle fighting on the front lines with him. Amherst, already fed up with his nonsense, is about to tell him off, but she's saved from the hassle when an adventurer steps out from the crowd, and this guy looks like he's already beaten the final boss and is just here to mop up the extras. The mysterious man then offers to join Margulis' party and casually asks if his strength is up to Margulis' standards. Margulis sizes him up, and yeah, the guy looks like he could bench press a mountain, but Margulis wants to be sure. So he draws his sword and charges at him, but it's a bad move because with just one swing, the man disarms Margulis in an instant, leaving him looking like a complete idiot in front of the entire guild. Trying to recover from the humiliation, Margulis reluctantly accepts him into the party. Siberia, on the other hand, isn't so sure because she's suspicious of anyone who walks around wearing a mask all the time. But Margulis doesn't care because if they don't take down the Hydra, Lightning Blade's already shaky reputation will sink faster than a stone in a pond. He then walks over to the guy and asks for his name, and the man simply says that his name is Shig. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Naru is admiring herself in the mirror when she hears someone knocking at Lois's door. She curiously steps out to check who it is and finds Sheila standing there. For a moment, her mind jumps to the worst, thinking Sheila's here to make a move on Lois. But after thinking it over for a moment, she realizes that's probably not the case. Once Lois finally opens the door, Sheila informs him that he's got guests waiting for him downstairs. Surprised but curious, Lois decides to see what's going on. When he gets downstairs, Lois and Naru are met by Armia and Lyra. Armia, looking guilty, apologizes for making such a bold request, but asks if Lois could help them out just this once. Margulis is still hell-bent on taking down that Hydra and even hire a new warrior for the mission, but Lyra doesn't think it'll be enough. For starters, Margulis is too stubborn to buy antidote potions because, well, they cost money, and he is never going to realize how reckless he's being until someone winds up dead. Armia knows it's way too late to apologize now, but she acknowledges how strong Lois is. If he hadn't cut off the Hydra's head last time, their whole party would have been wiped out. Lois downplays his role and says he didn't do that much. But Lyra quickly points out that even with two of the Hydra's heads already gone, the party barely survived, and if the beast had been in perfect condition, they would have been toast. Lois, now curious, asks Armia what exactly she's asking of him. Armia stands up and says she wants Lois to fight with him again because she's convinced they can defeat the Hydra if he's there. Basically, she's asking him to rejoin Lightning Blade, but Lois had that conversation with Margulis earlier, and his answer hasn't changed. Naru then confusedly wonders why Armia is so determined to help Margulis when the whole situation seems like a nightmare for her. Armia admits Margulis has more flaws than she can count, and that's being generous, but for better or worse, he's still her party member. Naru becomes angry after hearing this, and she reminds Armia that Lois was her party member too, but she did absolutely nothing to support him when he was being mistreated. Armia, now in tears, begins apologizing to Lois, and she explains that at the time she was terrified because if she didn't follow Margulis' lead, she would have been kicked out of the party too. As a new adventurer, she didn't know anyone else to turn to. Now, though she realizes how wrong she was and how wrong Margulis was for how he treated Lois, but even though she doesn't agree with Margulis' methods, she still doesn't want him to get himself killed in a battle he can't win. Lyra then tells Lois that Armia is genuinely sorry for everything and has been tormenting herself over it for a long time. And while she understands if Lois doesn't want to help, she asks that he at least accept Armia's apology. Lois then stands up, looks at Armia, and says he holds no grudge against her. He accepts her apology but makes it clear he still has no plans to rejoin Lightning Blade. Armia is disappointed, but she respects his decision and promises not to bring it up again. Right then, Mary shows up carrying a feast to lift Armia's spirits, noticing that she clearly hasn't been eating well. While Armia digs in, Lois turns to Lyra and asks if there's any way for her to get Armia out of Margulis' party, but Lyra frustratedly replies that if she could have done that, she wouldn't have come to him in the first place. Knowing full well how Margulis treats people, Lois suggests that Lyra should leave the party, but Lyra flat out refuses, explaining that leaving Armia to fend for herself under that idiot's leadership isn't an option. The next day, Margulis finally introduces Lyra to Shig, since they're heading out to face the Hydra again. The moment Lyra sees him, though, something clicks and she recognizes him from somewhere. So she pulls Shig aside for a word, asking why he's hiding his identity and what he's doing here. Shig, trying to act clueless, denies ever meeting her and attempts to walk away. But as he turns, Lyra catches sight of the sword on his back, a sword that once belonged to someone named Ronaldo. She immediately accuses him of stealing it, but Shig denies being a thief and claims the sword was given to him as a gift. While he clears himself of theft, his connection to Ronaldo confirms for Lyra that this is the same Shig she knew from the past. Still, she decides to keep his secret for now, figuring there must be a reason he's hiding his identity. Later that day, Lois and Naru head into the labyrinth as usual. But something nags at Lois because he can't shake the worry about Armia and the rest of Lightning Blade, and he's got no clue if they're truly prepared for the battle they're walking into. The scene then jumps to Naru battling monsters in the labyrinth, and she effortlessly takes care of them, even when one tries a cheap shot from behind. Lois praises her for the job well done, but Naru shrugs it off, saying she can keep going. Just then, her stomach growls loudly, and Lois with a grin teases her that while she might not be tired, her stomach clearly has had enough. So she embarrassedly snaps at him and he laughs, suggesting they stop for lunch, and Naru agrees. Next, we see them enjoying their packed lunch, and Lois is taken aback by the impressive spread and asks what's the special occasion. Naru explains that the innkeeper Mary loaded her up with all this food as she was leaving, insisting Naru take responsibility for finishing it since their little companion couldn't. They dig in, and as they eat, Lois starts explaining the dangers of a Hydra, a beast that's venomous and covered in tough scales, which make it almost invincible. Basic physical or magical attacks don't faze it, and Naru is startled to learn how dangerous it is. She expresses concern for Armia, but Lois reassures her that Hydras are common enough in high-level areas, and there are tried-and-true methods for dealing with them. He adds that while Hydra venom is deadly, a specialized antidote has been developed to counter it. Naru then remembers Lyra telling her they didn't buy the antidote, and Lois admits it's pretty pricey, which is why they're relying on Lyra's detox magic. Naru still worries about their friends, but Lois calmly tells her not to. After all, Lightning Sword is a capable party. Even if Margulis acts like an idiot half the time, he's a skilled swordsman when he gets serious, as long as he doesn't underestimate his enemy. He also mentions that Siberia's speed is top-notch. She could sneak behind the Hydra even with its wide field of vision. Naru frowns, not liking how highly Lois speaks of them, but he insists he's just stating facts, but still she can't shake her concern for them. Later, they get back to their adventure, and Naru admits to Lois that she's getting tired of the same old labyrinth grind. So she suggests they hit the wetlands instead, and though Lois is a bit taken aback by the change, he agrees. Cut to Margulis and his crew battling the Hydra. Margulis manages to land a hit on one of its heads, and Shig follows up by wounding another. Margulis urges him to finish the job and chop it off, but Shig pulls back at the last second. Margulis annoyedly demands to know why he hesitated, so Shig with a smug grin says it's because this kill should be his, asking if Margulis really wants him to steal the glory. Margulis confusedly presses for an explanation, and Shig casually drops that the title Hydra Slayer would look good on him. So of course the blockhead takes the bait and charges right in, but no surprise, it fails miserably. Meanwhile, Lyra, while healing Siberia, mutters about why Margulis insists on attacking from the front every time, but Siberia admits there's something charming about it. Lyra isn't buying it, but once Siberia is patched up, she jumps back into the fight to distract the Hydra, allowing Margulis another opening to strike. Armia then provides magical support, and Lyra starts thinking they might actually pull this off as long as they keep pressing the attack. But then she notices Shig just standing around, clearly taking a breather, so she suspiciously wonders what he's plotting. But before she can figure it out, the Hydra whips its tail and sends a stone flying straight at Armia, knocking her down. The beast immediately goes in for the kill, and poor Armia faints in terror. Suddenly, a thick black smoke starts pouring out of her unconscious body, and Siberia is the first to ask what the hell is going on. Shig calmly explains that it's fear, and he adds that monsters like this thrive on the fear of humans, turning it into strength. It's usually invisible to the human eye, but this one's sucking fear from everything around them. Lyra quickly realizes that this fear is being converted into mana, and Siberia confusedly asks if mana is supposed to leak out in places like this. Lyra shakes her head, saying that it shouldn't because mana normally only surfaces in the deepest parts of the labyrinth. The Hydra then starts glowing after absorbing mana, and Lyra quickly realizes it's mutating. She explains that monsters can morph their bodies by absorbing enough magic power, sometimes boosting their abilities in absurd ways. The Hydra then transforms into an even more menacing creature, and Shig concernedly asks Lyra to watch over Armia. She agrees while Shig tells Margulis to retreat, but Margulis, stubborn as always, refuses. After all the effort to weaken this beast, he's determined to take at least one of the Hydra's heads. He charges, but his sword shatters on impact, leaving him vulnerable as the Hydra lunges. But just as the Hydra's about to strike, Lois swoops in and saves him at the last second. Lois, Shig, and Naru then attack together, managing to wound the creature, but it's barely scratched. Shig then tells Lois to check on Armia and leave the Hydra to him, and Lois obliges, rushing to Lyra and asking how Armia is doing. Turns out she's not in great shape, and Lyra explains her healing magic isn't working on Armia. Since she's a wizard, she has natural resistance to magic. Lois then casts heal after heal on Armia, layering the spell, so Lyra looks unbaffled, wondering what the heck he's doing. Siberia calmly points out that this is just how Lois heals, and it's always worked for them. Lyra is floored by the idea, pointing out that it shouldn't work like that. She compares it to drinking a ton of potions to cure a cold, but it doesn't happen instantly, so why should this? Margulis, ever the genius, chimes in with a brilliant observation that he's never had a cold, proving that yes, idiots don't catch colds. Meanwhile, Lyra is still floored by the healing method when finally Armia wakes up. She recognizes Lois, thanks him, and promptly falls back asleep. The Hydra, now eyeing Lois like a predator, seems ready for round 2. Shig picks up on this, and Lois wonders if the creature actually remembers him. Naru then steps up, offering to join the fight. Lois, knowing there's no talking her out of it, accepts her help but warns her to back off if things get dicey. Shig, on the other hand, orders Lyra, Margulis, and Siberia to stay the hell away from the Hydra, and for once they agree. Afterwards, Naru and Lois charge at the monster, and Shig, in a badass move, manages to slice off one of its heads. Margulis then asks why Shig's sword didn't shatter like his sword did, so Lyra explains it's because Shig's wielding a magic sword. Margulis has heard of these legendary weapons but can't wrap his head around the fact that Shig of all people has one, making him question who Shig really is. Naru then goes in for another attack on the Hydra, but she messes up and loses her footing. The Hydra takes full advantage, tossing her into the air like a ragdoll, and she crashes to the ground, knocked out cold. Lois, then realizing the Hydra wants a one-on-one fight, figures it took Naru as some kind of twisted hostage. Siberia then wonders how a monster could possibly be this clever, and Lyra chimes in, explaining that mutated monsters can develop higher intelligence. Lois then tells the others to stay back while he faces the Hydra alone, but moments later we see that he's lying in the dirt, defeated. Lyra yells at him to get up and tries to reach for his weapon but collapses again. Just when it looks like it's over, something inside Lois snaps, like what happened with Luffy's Gear 5 transformation, and out of nowhere he gets back up with his body glowing with this eerie blue energy. The others are speechless, completely baffled by what they're witnessing. To everyone's shock, a horn suddenly sprouts from Lois' head, and without warning, he tears through the Hydra, slicing it up like tuna before passing out. The scene then shifts to Lois waking up, hearing Naru calling his name. He's relieved to see she's okay, and she tells him that Lyra had brought an antidote beforehand, so she's fine now. But of course, Lyra pipes up, saying the antidote wasn't cheap and that she'll definitely be charging them for it later. Lois then notices that Armia is still knocked out, but is relieved to find there's no danger to her life. Then Lyra, ever the curious, asks him about that strange form he took earlier, but Lois has no idea what she's talking about. But before they can get too far into it, Margulis butts in, telling Lois he's crazy strong and that with him on their side, even the toughest monsters wouldn't stand a chance. He even throws in that they might be able to take down the master of Mardat Labyrinth. Lois, still not buying into the hype, reminds Margulis he turned down his party offer. But Margulis, as usual, brushes it off, saying Lois doesn't need to worry about payment. After slaying the Hydra, they've got a ton of magic stones, and they can split it 3 ways between him, Siberia, and Lois. He adds smugly that the 2 newcomers won't be getting squat since they didn't do shit, and since Naru's just a sidekick, Lois should come up with some excuse to keep her happy. Lois, now shifting focus, asks what they're going to do about Armia, so Siberia bluntly states she's useless now, and there's a chance she might never wake up. So Margulis, ever the scumbag, suggests they sell her off to some pervy noble. This comment makes Lois' blood boil, but before he can react, Naru steps in and knocks Margulis to the ground with a punch. Margulis, stunned and furious, reminds her that the guild forbids adventurers from fighting each other, and she could be expelled for breaking the rules. He looks to the others for backup, demanding if they saw what she did, but they all deny it, much to his shock. But Siberia, on the other hand, sides with him, claiming she saw it all and will testify at the guild. Then Shid Cool as ever chimes in, and he casually mentions that he saw and heard something too, namely someone plotting to sell Armia off to a perverted noble before she woke up. And he reminds them that this is a serious crime and they have to arrest the guilty party. Margulis, now sweating, turns to Shiv and demands to know who he really is. The scene then shifts to the guild, where it's revealed that Shig is actually a direct adventurer from the Royal City's Adventurer Guild, and he's got Margulis and Siberia tied up. He finally drops the act, introducing himself by his real name C, but Lyra immediately points out that his disguise was full of holes from the start. Then Embers, the guild receptionist, steps in and asks why an adventurer from the capital would bother coming to this backwater town. So C reminds her that as a guild receptionist, she should know that direct adventurers have the authority to keep tabs on others. He explains that the town's security has been going downhill lately, which is why he came to investigate. And unsurprisingly, the first trouble he ran into was Margulis' crew, so Lyra curiously asks what's going to happen to them now. Amherst doesn't mince words. She says Margulis and Siberia are getting booted from the guild, and there's a good chance they'll face a lifetime of hard labor for human trafficking. Margulis gets panicking and tries to protest, saying they only talked about it and didn't actually go through with anything. But Amherst shuts him down, reminding him that the law doesn't care about intentions, so the two of them, now in deep trouble, start pointing fingers at each other, blaming the mess on the other. Lois then pulls Seed aside for a private chat, and he asks Seed to spare Margulis and Siberia. Seed, genuinely surprised, asks why he'd want that. So Lois explains that once upon a time, Margulis and Siberia had dreams of becoming great adventurers, but somewhere along the way their ambitions twisted. They started craving fame and fortune, losing sight of what they originally set out to do. Lois believes they didn't start out like this and hopes Seed will give them one more shot. Margulis and Siberia overhear this and are struck with guilt over their actions. Moved by Lois' pleas, Seed agrees to let them go. He unties Margulis and Siberia, but not without a stern warning. They need to leave town and never show their faces again, and with that, the two run off. Amherst then wonders aloud if this is really going to work, and Seed reassures her. He explains that if Margulis and Siberia had been expelled from the guild, they might have spiraled further into trouble, so it's better to keep them as adventurers where they can be monitored. Amherst is still doubtful and points out that Mardet isn't the capital. It's a small city and things run differently here. Seed shrugs it off, saying that's exactly why he'll be staying around for a while, and Amherst is glad to hear this. Later, Seed and Lyra talk at the inn, and Seed comes clean that he actually sticking around to keep an eye on the adventurers in town. The guild in the Royal City suspects the monster mutations could be linked to the Marmot division, and he wants Lyra to form a party with him to investigate. Lyra agrees, but with one condition. Armia has to join them too. Seed asks why, so Lyra explains she can't just leave Armia behind like this, and Seed, realizing he could use the extra help, agrees. He figures the more members, the better, especially since he's already got his hands full keeping tabs on everyone, including Lois, who definitely can't be left unsupervised. The scene then shifts to Lyra and Seed updating Lois and Naru on their new party formation with Armia, and Lois seems pleased, noting it's a well-rounded team with a healer, a saber, and a wizard. He then turns to Armia, asking how she feels about it, and she replies that she's more than okay with it since she doesn't have anywhere else to go, and she also adds that Lyra saved her life, so she's determined to repay her. Lyra laughs, explaining she told Armia not to worry about it, but Armia wouldn't hear of it. C chimes in, saying that's exactly why he thought this team would work so well. Lois then congratulates her on finding such solid party mates and encourages her to give it her all. Later that day, the scene shifts to Lois and Naru walking through town. Naru asks him what's on the agenda, and Lois suggests they stop by the guild first. Naru is surprised since they rarely head to the guild this early. He then takes her aside, revealing that they've forgotten to sell a Hydra's magic crystal in the rush of things, and mentions they should also accept a quest. He explains that while adventurers earn money by selling magic stones, completing quests is just as essential for a steady income. Naru already knows this, but Lois points out that if she's serious about her adventuring career, she'll need to complete quests, not just slay monsters. Embarrassed by Lois' concern, Naru blushes, trying to play it cool when he asks if anything's wrong. The scene then shifts to them arriving at the guild, where every eye turns in their direction. Naru senses an odd vibe and can't figure out why everyone's staring. Whispering spreads through the crowd as people talk about Lois' recent Hydra victory. Lois quickly realizes what's going on and pulls Naru aside to explain. He warns her to stay on guard, as news of their Hydra kill has traveled fast, and some unsavory folks might try to get their hands on the magic stone. An adventuring party soon approaches Loest, and the leader steps forward, asking if he knows who they are. Loest instantly recognizes the leader as Marnell. Marnell then asks if they can talk privately, but Loest hesitates, glancing at the whole gang surrounding him, so Marnell waves them off, telling them to give him and Loest some space. They step back reluctantly, clearly disappointed they won't get to hear the full story of how Loest took down a Hydra, and Marnell remarks that anyone would be curious hearing that the incompetent Loest managed to kill a Hydra. Realizing they're not here to steal his magic stones, Loest listens as Marnell begins with a surprising apology. Loest, caught off guard, asks what he's apologizing for. So Marnell explains that all the adventurers in town knew about Margulis's mistreatment of him, but never lifted a finger to help. He admits he told himself it wasn't his business and that Loest should handle things on his own. And the worst of it is many adventurers, including himself, mocked Loest for his supposed incompetence. He acknowledges that he hurt Loest deeply and knows his apology won't erase the past, but he still asks for his forgiveness. Naru furiously retorts that Marnell's right to apologize, and Marnell humbly asks what they can do to make things right. With a fierce look, she suggests he kneel before Loest for 3 days straight as a start, but Marnell's eyes widen, protesting that it's a bit much. But Naru argues 3 days wouldn't even scratch the surface of the years of humiliation Loest endured. Loest then quickly tells her to ease up, saying it would just make him look like the villain. She reluctantly agrees, and Loest turns to Marnell, adding that Hydra or no Hydra, he's still a flawed healer with a lot to learn and only knows a basic healing spell. So he insists that Marnell keep calling him incompetent if it helps, while offering him his hand and asking him to keep calling him that. Marnell then shakes his hand and tells him to reach out if he ever needs help. And with that, he and his party take their leave. Afterward, Loest shows the Hydra's magic crystal to Amherst, who's thrilled to see it, but then she immediately notices something unusual about it, commenting that the crystal looks different. Loest explains it's been affected by a mutation, and he wonders if this will impact the price. Amherst's eyes widen as she reveals it could boost the price tenfold or even more. Loest and Naru exchange a look of surprise, and Amherst laughs, saying it should be obvious. Rare items always fetch a higher price. She then confirms if this really is the Hydra's magic stone, pointing out that monsters need vast amounts of mana to mutate and typically only manage it deep within a labyrinth. Loest nods, acknowledging that it's odd for a Hydra to mutate in the marshlands, so they realize something strange may be happening, especially since the incident with the half-orc was also out of the ordinary. Amherst is equally concerned, and Naru wonders if the guild can't step in to investigate. Just then, Handsome arrives, noticing the tension and asking if something's wrong. Amherst explains that Naru and Loest need to ask him something, and Handsome gestures for them to speak directly. The scene then shifts to Loest and Naru in Handsome's office, reporting their findings. Handsome acknowledges that these incidents are rare, but says they've occurred in the past. He explains that the guild currently lacks the time and resources to investigate, prompting Loest to caution that ignoring this could lead to injured adventurers. Handsome is unimpressed and reminds him that adventuring is a dangerous profession, and suggests that if Loest is so nervous, he's welcome to skip town and go somewhere else. Later, we see Loest and Naru back with Amherst, and Naru fumes over Handsome's dismissal. Amherst sighs, telling them that's just how Handsome is. Naru then asks if they know who actually runs this guild branch. Loest answers that it's a man named Mist, though he's never met him. Amherst also adds that she hasn't either, explaining that Mist is too old to handle the day-to-day, so Handsome oversees everything in his place. Loest comments that Handsome must be highly capable, and Amherst agrees, though she adds that he holds his team to impossible standards and doesn't tolerate even minor mistakes, and Naru mutters that he certainly seems like that type. Loest then asks Amherst for a favor, and the scene shifts to them sorting through quest listings. They review a few options before Naru's attention lands on a quest to take down a phoenix. Loest and Amherst both look skeptical, knowing their current party isn't equipped for it, and Loest points out that a phoenix is a flying monster, meaning they need strong, long-range attacks, something neither of them excels at. Amherst adds that to tackle a phoenix, they'd ideally need a saber, a wizard, and a healer with area healing abilities, and this requirement immediately brings a certain party to mind. The scene then shifts to Loest and Naru approaching Lyra, Sieg, and Armia, asking if they'd be interested in joining the quest. Lyra then leans over to Sieg, whispering that joining Loest's party would be a good opportunity to keep an eye on him. They turn to Armia, who agrees to join but hesitantly asks if Loest is truly comfortable forming a party with her, given her past treatment of him. Loest assures her that he trusts she won't repeat her mistakes now that she's aware of them, and with that, they officially form their party and agree to tackle the Phoenix quest the following day. Afterward, Lois and Naru head out to gather the necessary equipment while Armia and Lara submit the quest application at the guild. Naru asks where they'll go first, and Lois suggests the potion shop, explaining that combining his heal spell with certain potions can speed up burn recovery. Naru impressively remarks that he's surprisingly knowledgeable, to which he humbly replies that it's part of being a healer. However, Naru quietly admits she meant more than just healing. Just then, she's suddenly grabbed from behind and she instinctively almost strikes her attacker, only to realize it's Ralma, who laughs and apologizes for the surprise. Naru then asks what brings her here, and Ralma reminds her that as a top-notch enchanter and adventurer, she has every reason to be in the Labyrinth City. But Naru suspects that her father sent Ralma here out of worry, and Ralma admits he did, reminding Naru that running away from home might have had something to do with it. Lois approaches, and Ralma's eyes widen in surprise to see the culprit behind Naru's sudden departure from home. It's then revealed that Ralma is actually Lois' master, leaving Naru surprised to hear the unexpected connection. The scene then shifts to them seated in a bustling restaurant where Lois casually explains that he once trained briefly under Ralma. He turns to Naru curiously about how she knows his master, and she explains that Ralma is an old friend of her father. Ralma starts to add more to the story, but Lois and Naru are deep in their own conversation, completely ignoring her. Ralma gets annoyed and finally snaps, telling Lois she's going to have a private talk with Naru about her family and demanding he step aside. Lois, however, refuses, firmly stating that he and Naru are partners and he suspects Naru's father might want her to return home. So Ralma, with a smirk, asks if he really thinks he can stand in her way, and Lois replies confidently that he's more than willing to try. In response, Ralma launches a small fireball at him, but Lois dodges it effortlessly, and she impressively admits that he's come a long way. He smirks back, noting that he endured a lot of training under that very magic, so Ralma gives in and allows him to stay. Naru then clarifies to Ralma that she didn't run away from home. She left in a hurry and simply didn't get the chance to explain herself, but she assures them that she did leave a letter. Lois curiously asks what she wrote in it, and Naru sheepishly admits that she told her parents she was going to find Lois, her big brother, and asked them not to worry. Lois and Ralma are both taken aback, and Ralma remarks that any parent would be concerned if their daughter left home, calling a stranger her big brother. Ralma then asks her why she left so suddenly, and Naru thinks that she can't possibly tell them the real reason. She had someone watching over Lois ever since that day, and when she heard he'd been kicked out of his party, she saw it as her chance and left home without a second thought. Lois then gently suggests that maybe it would be best for Naru to return home for now, even if she feels uncertain about facing her father, reminding her that she'll need her parents' consent to become an adventurer. Naru, with teary eyes, wonders if Lois will be okay without her, but he reassures her that's not what he meant. She then admits her fear that her father may forbid her from adventuring altogether, and if that happens, she may never get to return, and she also expresses how devastating it would be if she couldn't be with him. Ralma, however, assures her that her father doesn't oppose her plans to adventure. He's just concerned that she left so suddenly and wants to make sure she's okay. She adds that while he did ask her to bring Naru back if things were too dangerous, she'll assure him that everything's fine. Naru feels relieved, and Ralma asks Lois to fetch her some wine because she's parched. When Lois leaves, Ralma, now alone with Naru, asks if she's upset that Lois acts as if he doesn't need her help even though she left her family for him. Naru explains it's just because Lois is so capable now, but then Ralma recalls a time when he wasn't. Naru can hardly believe it, since Lois can heal, fight on the front lines, and detect traps like it's second nature. Ralma reveals that he only learned all that because of her help and someone else's guidance. Naru then reflects that what she admires most about Lois is how he always puts others first. She points out that he even went to negotiate a quest for her, hoping she'd join a real team and gain experience so she could make a living even if he wasn't there to support her. Naru then tearfully admits that while she came to town to help him, it's he who has ended up supporting her, and she feels she's just become a burden to him. Ralma reassures her that Lois has changed a lot since they last met, all because of Naru, and encourages her to spend more time with him. Later, Lois and Naru leave the restaurant, and Ralma stays behind with her drink. She finishes it, then decides it's time to get down to business, and the scene shifts to her standing before a grand mansion, wondering what Mist is up to. The following day, Lois and his party prepare for their quest. Sheila hands him a packed lunch, wishing them well, and they set off on their mission. The scene then shifts to Lois and the others teleporting to the middle levels of the labyrinth. Naru, fired up and ready to face the Phoenix, waits for its dramatic entrance, but the bird doesn't even bother to show up, so she annoyedly assumed it would charge at them the moment they stepped in. Lois then casually informs her that the Phoenix can't squeeze into such a small space, so Naru asks if it's huge, and Lois explains that while their sizes vary, none of them can navigate the tight passage leading here. Steed chimes in, dropping the obvious. Flying monsters hate confined spaces, and if they had a choice, they'd be chilling somewhere with a high ceiling, not skulking in cramped tunnels. Eventually, they stumble into an expansive chamber, and Lara immediately declares this must be the Phoenix's lair. She points out that this path is freshly discovered, unexplored, and according to the gossip mill, likely hiding treasures. Of course, the Phoenix is blocking the way forward, which is why adventurers posted a quest to take it down. Lois, sharp-eyed as ever, spots heat marks scorched onto nearby pillars and confidently states the Phoenix must be lurking around. To bait out, he tosses a stone forward, banking on the creature's territorial nature. Sure enough, the Phoenix bursts from a glowing portal above, and it soars through the massive chamber. The scene then shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where Ralma makes her entrance. Spotting her, Amberse quickly approaches, laying on the charm and giving her a warm welcome to the guild. Picking up on the atmosphere, Ralma remarks that this guild feels quite welcoming to adventurers. Amberse eagerly agrees, stating that the guild owes its very existence to adventurers. However, behind her words lies a calculated flattery. Amberse recognizes Ralma as a high-ranking adventurer, so despite her modest attire, the high-quality fabric and seemingly ordinary ornaments, which are actually expensive magical items, make it clear. Amberse is determined not to let someone of this caliber slip through her fingers. Eager to please, Amberse asks how she can assist Ralma, and Ralma responds that she'd like to meet the branch president. Amberse, puzzled by the unusual request, presses further, and Ralma clarifies that she wishes to meet Mist. When asked if she has a recommendation or appointment, Ralma admits she has neither. Amberse guesses she must be an acquaintance of Mist, but Ralma coolly denies this, adding that her business with him is simple: she wants to kill him. Amberse gets stunned and refuses outright, wondering if Ralma has completely lost her mind. Realizing she'll need to take a different approach, Ralma begins casting a fireball, clearly intending to use force. But before she can release it, Handsome steps in, stopping her with calm authority. Recognizing her instantly, he asks what she wants, and hearing her name, Amherst is struck by the revelation because Ralma is the fire god. Handsome then warns Amherst that if Ralma were serious, she could easily reduce the entire building to ashes, and Ralma relaxes slightly because she is satisfied to finally have someone with authority has finally shown up. Meanwhile, back in the labyrinth, the Phoenix continues its relentless flight. Naru observes the situation, realizing that neither her punches nor Lois' sword will be effective against the creature, so Lois grumbles that it might have been wiser to bring a bow. Despite the grim situation, Naru reassures herself that things aren't entirely hopeless. The Phoenix isn't attacking yet because of the distance. But that moment of respite ends abruptly as the Phoenix hurls a massive fireball at Naru, only for Lois to intervene and save her. He then explains that the fireball is the Phoenix's most dangerous attack, leaving Naru muttering her disbelief at how unfair the fight is turning out to be. Back at the guild, Handsome asks Ralma if she's here to talk about the same issue as the adventurer from yesterday, and he explains that the day before someone claimed something strange had happened in the labyrinth and demanded the guild take action. Then when Ralma inquires what he said in response, Handsome says he told the adventurer to leave town if he was too scared to explore the labyrinth. Ralma unimpressedly replies that her concerns are entirely different and notes that it's been a long time since she last visited Marmot, but the place now feels overrun with thugs. Handsome admits the guild has been worried about this too, but Ralma fires back, accusing them of being the ones responsible, so he confusedly asks why they'd sabotage their own city. Ralma doesn't know their reasons, but is certain they're scheming something. Then she gestures toward the strange pillars scattered around town and demands to know what they are, pointing out their sudden presence everywhere. Handsome insists he knows as little as she does, claiming the pillars have nothing to do with the guild, but Ralma, unconvinced, accuses him of playing dumb. Then when he challenges her to provide proof linking the guild to the pillars, she admits it's just her intuition, which makes him laugh at how far-fetched her claims sound. Ralma then reminds him that in a labyrinth city, the Adventurers Guild wields absolute power, with the branch president essentially acting as the city's king. Yet Handsome claims to have no idea what's happening, a claim Ralma finds implausible, so he tries to deflect, reminding her he's merely a sidekick to the branch president, but Ralma still sees through the act and accuses him of feigning ignorance. In response, he tells her that if she doesn't like how things are run, she's free to leave. But Ralma undeterredly insists something sinister is brewing because she's noticed that every time an adventurer questions the guild, they're told to leave, almost as if the guild doesn't want them staying in Marmot. Handsome asks her outright what she believes the guild is planning, so Ralma speculates darkly, suggesting that something big is about to happen. Something requiring the sacrifice of numerous adventurers, especially those whose absence won't stir trouble, and she concludes grimly, noting that the situation feels eerily similar to a labyrinth rampage. The scene then cuts to the labyrinth, where the Phoenix unleashes a relentless barrage of fireballs. Sieg surveys the chaos, grimly noting that if this keeps up, the entire room will become a blazing sea of fire. Lara chimes in, pointing out that the suffocating heat is bad enough, but the real danger is the growing lack of oxygen, and soon they won't be able to hold their ground. Lois observes that the Phoenix seems intent on driving them out to defend its territory, but Naru puzzledly remarks that monsters usually attack humans the moment they see them. Lois counters, saying the Phoenix must sense that it can't take on all 5 of them at once because monsters might not think like humans, but their instincts are sharp enough to guide them. Sieg, deciding there's no time to waste, announces that their only option is to fight. Turning to Armia, he asks if she can use water magic. When she confirms, he tells her to target the Phoenix wings, explaining that the flames on its wings act like feathers. If they can extinguish those flames, they'll force the creature lower, giving him a chance to finish it off with his sword. Armia hesitates, admitting it will take time to cast such a spell, but Sieg reassures her he'll protect her. Naru chimes in with her own vow to help, bolstering Armia's resolve. So with newfound determination, Armia agrees to give it her all. As Sieg, Lois, and Naru work to distract the Phoenix, Armia begins casting her spell. Lara then watches silently and hopes that Armia will overcome her past struggles and find the courage to trust her team. Lara knows that if Armina can push through, she'll prove herself to be a truly capable adventurer. Finally, Armina fires a magical water arrow at the Phoenix, dousing its flaming wings and forcing it down. Sieg seizes the moment, launching a powerful attack, but it's not enough and the Phoenix soars upward again. Despite the setback, Lois remains optimistic, confident that if they keep up the pressure, victory is within reach. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Handsome contemplates the possibility of a labyrinth rampage, brushing it off as something that rarely occurs. However, Ralma argues that if one does happen, it would explain the strange occurrences in town, and she points out that the most troubling sign is the mutation of monsters and presses Handsome to acknowledge the vast amounts of mana now surrounding the labyrinth. Back at the labyrinth, the Phoenix begins mutating. The beast grows larger, and its fiery orange flames shift to an intense blue. Naru notes that mutations are supposed to be rare, and Lois agrees, adding that encountering 2 in just a few days is almost unheard of. Armia, visibly shaken, wonders why she keeps running into these mutated monsters. Lara tries to reassure her, but Armia is too paralyzed by fear to listen. Lara realizes this is a serious problem because if Armia succumbs to her fear again, it could empower the Phoenix. She knows Armia must overcome this moment if she's ever going to grow, but Lara has no idea how to snap her out of it. The Phoenix, then sensing weakness, charges toward Armia. Lara shouts at her to dodge, but Armia is frozen in place. The beast then launches a fireball, but Sieg intercepts it, slicing through the flames with precision and saving her at the last second. The Phoenix then retaliates with a relentless barrage of fireballs, but Sieg cuts through everyone, urging Armia to step up and shouts that they can't do this without her. Lara reaches out, extending her hand to Armia, and something finally clicks. Armia agrees to help but asks for a bit of time, so her team holds the line, buying her the moment she needs. Meanwhile, outside the labyrinth, Ralma has left the guild. Reflecting on her encounter, she mutters that she hadn't expected them to spill the truth so easily. She moves to the stone pillars scattered around the city and uses her fire magic on one of them. Examining the reaction, she concludes this isn't normal magic and wonders what on earth she's dealing with. Back in the labyrinth, Naru lands a punch on the Phoenix, but it barely phases the creature and her hand catches fire in the process. She quickly extinguishes the flames, but the Phoenix counters with another attack. Lois blocks it, but his sword melts from the intense heat. As the battle rages on, Armia prepares to fire another spell. Recognizing the strain she's under, Lara casts a healing spell to restore her stamina, knowing how tough it is to use attack magic twice in quick succession. Armia then launches an ice arrow, striking the Phoenix and knocking it out of the sky. Despite the hit, the Phoenix regains flight. Sieg then resolves to face it head-on, but before he can act, Naru delivers another devastating punch, finally grounding the creature. Lois then seizes the opportunity and finishes it off by driving his knife into the Phoenix's head. This defeats the Phoenix, and Lois compliments Armia on a job well done. He points out that it's all thanks to her magic that they managed to secure the win, and the others wholeheartedly agree. Overwhelmed with joy, Armia starts crying and thanks everyone for their support. She then picks up the monster's magic crystal while the rest of the group savors their victory. Amid the cheers, Lara quietly tells Sieg that Lois didn't transform this time, so Sieg wonders aloud what that transformation from before could have meant, resolving to keep an eye on Lois for a while. The scene then shifts to the inn, where the group reunites with Ralma, who's drinking at a table. She casually asks if they managed to take down the Phoenix, surprising them with her knowledge of the event. When questioned, she explains that a talkative girl spilled everything after she threw some money her way, and seeing their relaxed demeanor, Ralma guesses they must have defeated the monster. She then jokes that they should use their reward money to treat her to dinner, though Lois suspects she's more interested in drinks than food, and with that they all sit down for a meal. As they eat, Naru marvels at the delicious food, confessing that she never knew such flavors existed before coming here, but Ralma unimpressively grumbles that the food is mediocre at best, with tough, ordinary meat. Sheila, who arrives to serve more drinks, overhears the comment and leaves in a huff, clearly offended. Ralma then turns to Naru with a smirk, telling her to enjoy the soup while she can because she won't find anything like it back at the mansion, and this comment leaves the others puzzled. Noticing their confusion, Ralma realizes Naru hasn't shared her backgrounds, so without hesitation she says that Naru is actually the daughter of the Earl of Analastoria. The group is stunned and Ross suddenly recalls that she's the same girl he saved once before. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Handsome informs Mist about the Phoenix mutation that occurred earlier, and he also mentions that Ralma is currently in town. Hearing this, Mist replies with a serious tone that they will be going to need his disciples' help. The next day, Lois and Naru head to the guild to exchange the Phoenix magic gem for money. But when Amherst presents their payment, Naru is furious because it looks embarrassingly small. Phoenix gems are known to be extremely valuable, and this one came from an evolved phoenix, making it worth even more. To Naru, there's no way this meager sum is fair, so Amherst must be trying to rip them off if that is all. But while Amherst might be a shamelessly money-hungry opportunist, she's no thief, and she calmly assures Naru that the pouch contains the full value of the gem and even invites her to double-check for herself. Typically, the guild pays adventurers in silver coins, but in this case, the payment would have amounted to hundreds of thousands of silver coins, so it would have been a logistical nightmare to avoid that. Amherst exchanged the value into gold coins instead, making it far easier to transport. Then when Naru finally inspects the pouch, she's stunned to realize Amherst wasn't lying. Flustered and unsure of what to say, she stands awkwardly as Lois steps in, quietly accepting the payment and settling Amherst's fee before walking off without a word. Amherst, ever thrilled to pocket her cut, can't help but notice that Lois seems unusually subdued, so she leans toward Naru and asks if something happened between them. Naru brushes her off and follows Lois outside, where the two of them sit down for a quick snack. But even then, Lois remains eerily silent. Unable to bear the tension any longer, Naru finally breaks the ice and says that there's something she's been wanting to ask him. With her new fortune in hand, Naru suggests they rent a detached house together. Her sudden proposal catches Lois completely off guard, but she quickly explains her reasoning. Staying in hotels isn't just inconvenient, it's expensive, so with the money they've earned, renting a private house is not only more secure, but also far more economical. Besides, Naru has already done her homework on the housing market, and in fact, she points out that they could even afford to buy a house, not rent it, if they wanted to. Lois agrees with Naru's points, but can't help asking if there's a specific reason she's bringing this up now, like a complaint about Mary's hotel, but Naru quickly clarifies that there's nothing wrong with the hotel itself. It's comfortable, the food is excellent, and it's no wonder it's so popular. However, its popularity means it's always bustling with activity, but what she doesn't admit is the real reason behind her suggestion is she longs for a private space where she and Lois can have uninterrupted conversations, and maybe, just maybe, grow close enough for something a bit more intimate. Flustered by her own unholy thoughts, Naru's cheeks turn crimson. Lois, completely unaware of what's running through her mind, responds with his usual practical tone and tells her it's still too early for them to buy a house together, because for now he believes they should save their money for potential emergencies, and besides, they need to consider their situation with the others. After returning from the Phoenix hunt, C had proposed the idea of forming a permanent party since they all worked so well together. Lois hasn't given him a definitive answer yet, but he's been seriously mulling over. If they plan to venture into the labyrinth's deeper floors, he and Naru will struggle on their own, so adding strong teammates like C would be crucial. While Naru isn't thrilled at the thought of sharing Lois' attention, she knows he's right, so begrudgingly she agrees that merging parties with C and the others is the best move. Later that day, Lois and Naru meet up with the rest of the group to finalize their decision, and together they agree to form a unified party, so C raises his mug proposing a celebratory toast to their new team. Mary, ever the gracious host, overhears and surprises them with a special meal on the house. After the feast, Armia falls into a blissful food coma, and as the hour grows late, Lyra volunteers to take her upstairs. Lyra then heads toward the stairs while hoisting the drowsy Armia onto her back, but just as she's about to ascend, Naru approaches her saying there's something she'd like to discuss. They head upstairs together, and after settling Armia into bed, Naru confides in Lyra about her earlier conversation with Lois regarding buying a house together. Lyra, impressed by Naru's boldness, compliments her for taking such a step. However, Naru admits that Lois rejected the idea, which has her wondering if he might hate her. But Lara quickly reassures her that Lois doesn't hate her. In fact, it's more likely that he's hesitant because he cares deeply for her. Lois doesn't strike Lara as the shy type, but every man has his own way of approaching these things, so Lara advises Naru to be patient and give him time. Feeling reassured, Naru thanks Lyra for her advice and admits she's glad she turned to her for help because she knew Lyra would offer great relationship insights. But as Naru heaps on the praise, Lyra can't help but be reminded of her own experience. After all, she's never even had a boyfriend. Meanwhile, downstairs, Lois and Sieg are having a similar conversation. Sieg is direct, suggesting that Lois should just agree to live with Naru and points out that it's not like he's getting married or anything. It also adds that Naru clearly admires Lois and refusing her would hurt her feelings. Sieg then asks bluntly if Lois dislikes the idea of living with her, but Lois quickly denies it. In truth, he could never hate Naru because she was the one who gave him hope when he was at his lowest point, and she even came all the way to this city just to form a party with him. And for that, he will always be grateful. Still, Sieg isn't buying Lois' excuses because it's obvious to him that Lois likes Naru, but he is just too embarrassed to admit it. Back in Lara and Naru's conversation, Lara opens up about her romantic history. When she lived in the royal capital, she often had men vying for her affection, so much so that some would join her party just to get closer to her. Sieg was one of those men, and one day while Sieg was away, another man was so hungry that he tried to get frisky with Lyra without asking her. Refusing to let it slide, she knocked him out cold and dragged him outside. She was ready to let the incident go, but when Sieg found out, forgiveness wasn't on the table. He kicks the man hard out of the city, and then he vanishes from the city as well. Lara admits she has no idea what Sieg was thinking back then, but downstairs, Sieg is confiding in Lois about the same incident. He explains that he was furious with himself for not being there to protect Lyra and felt too ashamed to face her, so he left the royal capital. After a long time passed, he eventually came to this city on a mission. But he never could have expected to run into Lyra here, and to top it off, she was even willing to form a party with him after learning about his mission, even though he thought she must have been angry at him. What Sieg doesn't know is that Lyra was never angry, and she was just hurt that he disappeared without saying a word. Since then, she's been uncertain about how Sieg truly feels about her. Just then, Sheila walks into the room, and after Hart at the end of the conversation, Sheila bluntly remarks that if Lara is this bothered by it, she must have feelings for Sieg. Downstairs, Sieg apologizes to Lois for making him sit through his story, but back to the initial topic, Sieg presses Lois again why he refused Naru's suggestion to live together. Lois admits he's not entirely against the idea, quite the opposite in fact. It made him happy to hear Naru say she wanted to live with him, that there was something important he needed to confirm before making a decision. Just then, Amherst arrives at the inn looking for Lois because she has completed the investigative report he requested. Sieg then curiously asks why the guild is involved in private investigations, but Amherst clarifies that this isn't guild business. Lois had personally asked her to do some research for him, which is why she's here after hours. Then before starting, Amherst asks if it's okay to discuss this in front of Sieg, but Lois without hesitation assures her that Sieg is trustworthy, and with that, Amherst begins her report on Naru. Naru is the only daughter of the Earl of Analastoria, and by tradition, Naru and whoever she chose to marry would inherit her father's title. One day, she suddenly declared she wanted to become an adventurer. While it's not unheard of for nobles to take up adventuring, no parent would willingly support their only child taking on such a dangerous profession. So initially, the Earl was firmly against the idea, but his stance changed completely after one peculiar event. Naru's hair suddenly turned blue overnight. This unexpected change in Naru's appearance was the reason that left Lois puzzled as well. He knew her hair color had changed, but he didn't realize it happened so suddenly, and the cause of this transformation remains a mystery. Still from that point onward, the Earl surprisingly stopped objecting to Naru's decision to become an adventurer. Lois can't help but wonder why the Earl would have such a drastic change of heart, so Sieg then suggests a grim possibility that Naru might have a terminal condition and her father wanted her to enjoy her freedom before she dies. But this doesn't quite add up because Naru is incredibly strong enough to punch a phoenix out of the sky, so she doesn't appear to be in any immediate danger. Whatever the reason, one thing is certain. Naru has her father's full consent to pursue her adventuring career, and that's what Lois needed to confirm. While he never wanted to doubt Naru's claims, there was always a small chance she was lying about her father's approval just to stay close to him. But now that he knows the truth, he feels relieved to have confirmed it. After Amherst receives her payment, she promptly leaves, uninterested in lingering for the ongoing discussion. Once she's gone, Sieg turns to Lois and asks what he would have done if Naru's father had disapproved of her becoming an adventurer. Lois explains that in such a case, he would have told her to return home temporarily and try to convince her parents properly. And if that didn't work, he would have still supported her in any way necessary, but thankfully it seems that won't be an issue now. Upstairs, the girls are piecing everything together. Naru is the daughter of an earl, yet she trained relentlessly, dropped everything to come here after hearing that Louis had been kicked out of his party, and even boldly asked him to live with her. They're all deeply impressed by how proactive Naru is in her romantic pursuit, and Lara can't help but wish she could be as courageous. And that makes the group devise a plan to help. They bring Lara downstairs and practically drag her into confessing her feelings to Sieg, so she nervously asks him if they can have a private chat outside. Sieg, puzzled but noticing her seriousness, agrees to step outside with her. Once they're alone, Lara musters the courage to ask Sieg to be her partner. Initially, Sieg misunderstands, thinking she's talking about their adventuring party, but Lara quickly clarifies that she means partners for life. Only then does it dawn on Sieg that she's confessing her romantic feelings. Meanwhile, all the girls are crowded near the door, eagerly spying on the conversation to see Sieg's reaction. Sieg is completely flustered and stammers that he needs time to think about it. Lara, while disappointed by his lack of an immediate answer, understands because Sieg has never been the type to plan ahead when it comes to matters of the heart, so she's willing to wait for his decision. The girls are thrilled that Lyra's confession went better than expected. Then Lois turns to Naru and asks if she has time to talk with him tomorrow because there's something important he wants to tell her. Meanwhile, down in the labyrinth, a group of rookie adventurers finds themselves cornered by an orc on the upper floors. They don't stand a chance against it, so they desperately hide, hoping it moves on. Fortunately, the orc doesn't notice them and lumbers past, and just when they think they're in the clear, they make a dash for the exit, but another orc appears and cuts off their path. And to make matters worse, the first orc starts doubling back, leaving the group moments away from being trapped on both sides unless they act fast. But not to worry, because the group's leader had prepared for situations like this to ensure everyone's survival, which is precisely why they brought Keith. But as for poor Keith, well, let's just say he won't be writing a memoir about this adventure, because the group uses him as bait to lure the orcs away while they make their escape. Meanwhile, back in town, Lois and the others are enjoying breakfast together. But Naru is so lost in thought she can barely focus on her food. Stieg and Lara start to worry about her, assuming her distraction has something to do with Lois. He mentioned having something important to tell her, but never specified what it was or when they talk, so now Naru can't stop daydreaming about what it might be. Lara nudges Lois, suggesting he stop stalling and just talk to Naru already. But Lois hesitates because this isn't a conversation to rush. Still, if he drags it out much longer, Naru might actually start nibbling on flowers out of nervousness, so he finally decides to rip off the bandage. Lois then approaches Naru, and the moment he calls her name, she jolts nervously and asks what he needs. He tells her it's time for that discussion, and she eagerly braces herself for whatever he's about to say. But before Lois can get a single word out, the door to the inn slams open. And somehow, against all odds, Keith stumbles in alive but battered. Sheila recognizes him instantly and panickedly rushes over to check on his injuries. A little while later, Lois finishes healing Keith and reassures everyone that the kid is going to be fine, and his injuries weren't nearly as bad as they seemed, so for now, Lyra and Sheila will be looking after him. The others find this arrangement a bit odd because it makes sense for Lyra to be involved since she's a healer, but why does Sheila? So Mary steps in to explain that Sheila and Keith have been friends since they were kids. Keith is a labyrinth orphan, so he grew up alongside Sheila and is the same age as her. So Mary could never abandon him, and she often let him hang around the inn and share meals with them. And over time, she grew attached to him and would have gladly given him a job at the inn. But Keith had his heart set on becoming an adventurer, so Mary supported his dream. She even remembers how happy he looked when he told her he'd join his first party. And now look how that turned out. Lois then turns to Naru, apologizing for postponing their talk again because there's something urgent he needs to handle first. He'd already called in a favor to track down the party that abandoned Keith in the labyrinth. The guild members caught up with them and delivered a thorough beating as punishment. And now they're offering Lois the chance to decide their fate. But after seeing the state they were left in, Lois decides they've been punished enough. But he orders the party to leave the city immediately, warning them to never come back, and with no other choice, the party flees. Amherst, however, isn't thrilled, and while she understands Lois' anger and why he sought justice, disputes between adventurers are supposed to be handled by the guild, not vigilant action. So she warns that she can't condone their approach. This enrages the adventurers, who point out that the guild did absolutely nothing to address the issue in the first place, nor were they planning to take any meaningful steps to ensure justice for Keith. Amherst concedes that the guild's response to these situations is woefully inadequate, but reminds them that she's bound by management's orders and has little say in how these matters are handled. Just then, Handsome arrives fuming and begins scolding the adventurers for taking matters into their own hands and banishing the party, and he claims that they had no authority to make such a decision. The adventurers, however, fire back, yelling that Handsome has no right to criticize them when he did absolutely nothing to address the problem in the first place. Tensions rise until Lois steps in, urging everyone to calm down and assure them that he'll speak with Handsome directly to address their grievances. When Lois meets with Handsome, he lays out everything that happened. Handsome is still displeased that the adventurers acted on their own, but now that he's heard the full story, he can understand why they did what they did. Lois then challenges Handsome, asking why he hasn't implemented any measures to prevent such situations, and he points out that other cities have policies to protect Labyrinth orphans from being used as bait. But Handsome counters with a sharp question of his own. Will those policies actually be enforceable in Labyrinth? Cities can draft all the rules and regulations they want, but if they don't result in meaningful changes, they're just a waste of time and resources. Lois then presses further, asking if Handsome intends to abandon all the Labyrinth orphans who end up being exploited. But Handsome corrects him, stating that Lois is missing the point. He's always been upfront. Anyone dissatisfied with the way this city operates is free to leave. It's not about shutting down complaints, it's about making sure that only those who can truly handle the life of an adventurer take up the role. The guild has never forced anyone to become an adventurer, and that includes Keith. If Keith can't handle the risks inherent to the job, Handsome argues that he should have chosen a different path. Lois wants to push back to tell Handsome he's wrong, but part of him reluctantly agrees with the harsh truth in his words. Still, Lois insists there has to be a better way to address the situation and protect Labyrinth orphans. At this, Handsome stands and recalls something a man once told him. For an adventurer, the incompetent are as good as dead, so it's best to be prepared from the very start. Handsome then reminds Lois that those were his words spoken years ago, and to drive the memory home, Handsome reveals a scar he received during their time together. Years ago, when Lois was just starting out as an adventurer, he and Handsome got roped into being the pack mules for a party of seasoned adventurers. Handsome in particular was treated like dirt, so seeing this, Lois offered to help carry some of Handsome's load to ease his burden. But Handsome, too proud to accept pity from someone as useless as Lois, barked back at him to shut up and mind his own business. That night, while the rest of the group huddled by the fire warm and laughing, Handsome sat alone in the freezing cold, stewing in regret over taking this miserable job, even if it paid all right. Hours later, after the others had fallen asleep, Lois woke Handsome with an urgent warning. A group of goblins was approaching. He told Handsome to alert the others while he stayed behind to keep watch, so Handsome did as he was told. When the group assembled, Lois explained the situation. The others were skeptical and demanded to know if he was certain, but Lois stood firm. There was no mistaking it. A massive horde of goblins was closing in, and they are too many to count. When the group finally saw the goblins for themselves, panic set in. They realized there was no way to win against such overwhelming numbers, so their only hope was to flee, but the leader argued that running outright was too dangerous. To buy time, the party devised a cruel plan, used Lois and Handsome as bait to distract the goblins. Before Handsome could grasp what was happening, he and Lois were shoved off the side of a cliff and left behind. Handsome then furiously called for help, but Lois stopped him and explained bitterly that the others had never intended to help them. And this was likely why they'd been allowed to join the party in the first place as disposable pawns for the dirty work. The situation enrages Handsome, though he knows there's nothing he can do until they escape. He and Lois vow to survive this ordeal together and take revenge on the party that heartlessly abandoned them. They fight fiercely against the goblins for what feels like an eternity, but facing such a massive horde of only the two of them is a losing battle. So eventually they have no choice but to retreat, taking refuge in a hollow tree to avoid detection. Handsome begins to lose hope, consumed by the thought that survival against the goblin horde is impossible, and also the bitterness of being sacrificed by their former allies gnaws at him. However, Lois points out something few people know. Goblin hordes are actually more inclined to target larger groups, so if the goblins find the party, they'll redirect their attack. And almost as if on cue, the goblins locate the party and immediately swarm them. Amid the chaos, while the party is being brutally slaughtered, Lois and Handsome manage to slip away unnoticed. Handsome feels no pity for the party, thinking they got exactly what they deserve for betraying him and Lois. But Lois, despite everything, expresses regret because he hates the idea of anyone dying, even if they abandoned him. Still, he knows there's nothing they can do, so he urges Handsome to focus on getting back to town. As Handsome moves to follow, he suddenly collapses in agony because his arm was injured during the battle with the goblins. Lois is stunned and demands to know why Handsome hit it, and Handsome admits he didn't want to be a burden, especially in such a dire situation. Lois tries to heal him, but Handsome protests, warning that the goblins will notice them if he keeps it up. He then tells Lois to leave him behind, blaming himself for being weak and claiming someone as useless as him doesn't deserve to live. But Lois refuses to abandon him and fiercely shouts that Handsome is wrong, that even in a world that's cruel to those deemed incompetent, there's always hope for redemption. From that moment on, Lois and Handsome fought side by side, breaking through the goblins' defenses with sheer determination until they finally reached the safety of the city. To Handsome, Lois was nothing short of salvation, yet Lois's cold truth about the world being harsh on the incompetent still rang true. The twist of fate, however, was that the true incompetents that day were the adventurers who fled, ignorant of the goblins' behavior patterns and leaving Handsome and Lois to fend for themselves. Once they returned to the city, Lois and Handsome parted ways. Handsome, however, crossed paths with an elder who took him in. Under this person's guidance, Handsome learned a great deal, eventually growing into a capable adventurer. That elder turned out to be none other than Guildmaster Mist, which explains how Handsome became a guild employee and rose to serve as the Guildmaster's trusted right-hand man. But Handsome wasn't telling the story to bask in nostalgia. He owed his life to Lois for that fateful day and was determined to repay the debt. Handsome urged Lois to take Naru and leave the city for his own safety. His words are not a threat, but an earnest warning born from genuine concern because Handsome doesn't want Lois to be ensnared in the dangerous events that are about to unfold. Lois, confused by the cryptic advice, left Handsome's office and returned to the other adventurers, admitting that he failed to convince Handsome to reconsider his strict policies. At that moment, Amherst pulled Lois aside. She revealed that many in the guild didn't agree with the way the guildmaster was running things, and that's when she presented Lois with a personal request. Later that day, Lois goes to Naru and discusses the request Amherst gave him. Apparently, a surge of monsters has been appearing on the roads near the city, so she concernedly asks Lois to handle the situation before any civilians become casualties. Naru agrees but questions why the guild hasn't issued a bounty for these monsters. However, such an action would require Handsome's approval, and it's clear he's not going to sign off on that. There's also the matter of criminal adventurers causing chaos throughout the city, so Lois offers to assist with that as well. While Naru acknowledges that Lois' intentions are noble, she can't help but point out how much additional work he's taking on, but Lois reassures her and explains that Amherst promised them bonus pay for dealing with the monsters on the road. Yet because this mission isn't guild approved, the reward will come directly from Amherst's own pocket, and that is something she clearly doesn't want to do but feels is only fair considering Lois is going out of his usual duties to assist. The next day we find Sieg training Keith and a group of young boys in swordsmanship. Lois arrives with Naru, beaming with pride at how well Keith is progressing. Lara, not one to miss a chance for credit, points out that much of this success is due to her healing spells. However, she emphasizes that Keith's natural resilience and determination to recover played the most significant role. It's clear Keith has a calling to be an adventurer. After all, it was his own idea to ask Sieg for training. Once the sword lessons conclude, it's Naru's turn to teach hand-to-hand combat techniques. Spotting an opening, Lyra inquires if Lois has already spoken with Naru about the thing. But Lois, as absent-minded as ever, seems to have completely forgotten, so Lyra gets angry at him and C, with a smile, notes that she's back to her usual fiery self. Meanwhile, Handsome meets with the guildmaster, bringing along a letter from the Prime Minister. The letter serves as a stern reminder for the guild to monitor Naru closely. Confused about why someone like Naru would attract the Prime Minister's interest, Handsome asks Mist for clarification. Mist then shares the tale of the evil dragon and the sleeping princess, a widely known fairy tale in their world. In the story, the princess sacrifices herself to defeat the malevolent dragon. But Mist reveals that it's more than just a tale, it's a prophecy destined to unfold. The mark of one chosen by the gods to fulfill this role is the sudden appearance of blue hair, a description that chillingly matches Naru perfectly. We then see Lois and his party outside the town where they come across a group of monsters. Naru observes that these creatures seem to match the description provided by Amherst, so they must be the ones that appear frequently in this area. The group then discusses how to handle the situation, and Lyra suggests setting up an ambush halfway to the town, while Armia proposes attacking from a distance using long-range magic. However, Lois, eager to take them head-on, insists on fighting directly, explaining that he wants to take out every last one of them. Armia agrees that attacking from afar could let some monsters escape, and Sieg suggests approaching from downwind to gain an advantage, so Lois likes Sieg's idea and decides to go with it. As they move downwind, they come across the very same carriage in which Naru was attacked years ago, a grim reminder of the town's neglect in cleaning up such wreckage. The monsters then soon notice them and launch an attack, prompting the group to fight back together. Naru reflects on how helpless she was back then, that all she could do was break down in tears, but she reminds herself that she's not the same person anymore. And also, while Lois fights fiercely, He recalls how he could barely stand against these creatures the last time, even when giving it his all. But despite these memories, they feel happy that they kept their promise and are now fighting side by side as a team. After an intense battle, they successfully defeat all the monsters, but before they can celebrate, an earthquake shakes the ground beneath them, its effects reaching all the way back to their town. Although the tremor causes some collateral damage, the citizens thankfully remain unharmed. Then we see Mist observing the unfolding events and remarks that it has finally begun. Meanwhile, Lois and his party then return to Mary's Inn, relieved to find that everyone is safe. Their relief is short-lived though, as an adventurer bursts in with an urgent message, and he informs Lois that Marnell is looking for him. Lois confusedly wonders if something has happened to the guild, but the adventurer clarifies that Marnell isn't at the guild. He's waiting for Lois at the town's entrance. Lois and his party then head over to Marnell, who points out a group of goblins just outside the town gate. Naru is shocked to see so many still left, especially after they had just wiped out a large number of them, and she also notices that hobgoblins are among the group. Lois then quickly realizes that the goblins are preparing to attack the town, and he knows this is bad news because the town is already in disarray from the earlier quake, so he knows this will be hell for them. Marnell agrees, saying they need to stop the goblins here and now, but he acknowledges the difficulty of dealing with all of them. This, he explains, is why he sought Lois' help. Still, since they haven't secured any agreements with the guild, there's no guarantee they'll be paid for this effort, but Marnell assures Lois that he won't hold it against him if he declines, but Lois and his party immediately agree to help, stepping up to face the goblins. Armia then launches her magic at the enemies while Sieg skillfully swings his sword, cutting through the goblins. But Lois Ever, the daredevil, takes on the hobgoblins, managing to slice off one of their arms. The hobgoblin is so stunned by this that it begins to speak, hurling curses at Lois and swearing vengeance. The other goblins rally behind their leader, shouting that they will kill everyone, and the adventurers are taken aback by the talking monsters. Marnell is baffled and remarks that he's never seen anything like this, and even Sieg, who grew up in the city, says he's never heard of monsters talking. Lois decides to push this mystery aside for now, focusing on the immediate threat, defeating the monsters and protecting the townspeople. So Marnell rallies his team, urging them to stop trembling and fight as they always do, and with renewed determination, everyone charges into the fray. After an intense battle, they finally defeat the goblins. But the hobgoblin then warns them that while they may have won the battle, they will lose the war and every human will perish. And then the hobgoblin drops dead moments later. And while examining its remains, Lois notices a magical crystal embedded in the hobgoblin and realizes that it was a mutated monster. However, he finds it difficult to believe that such a mutation could grant the ability to speak. Just as the group is catching their breath, another adventurer arrives, shouting that they are in serious trouble, and he points to a massive swarm of monsters emerging from the labyrinth. Lois and his party then climb to a vantage point and are horrified to see the sheer number of creatures because it's easily 3 times the number they had just fought, with even more pouring out of the labyrinth. Sieg then wonders what they should do, as holding them all back seems impossible, so Lois, with a heavy heart, decides they have no choice but to retreat for the time being. Naru then, with worry in her voice, wonders what they are going to do next, and Lois confidently reveals that the plan is to join forces with other adventurers in Marmot and turn these monsters into nothing more than mincemeat. But their plans are thrown off when Lois notices a large crowd gathering in front of the Adventurers Guild. So Lois curiously wonders what's going on, and he soon discovers that a bounty has been placed on the monsters escaping the labyrinth. The payout is substantial, and this explains the massive crowd. Even Amherst thinks the amount being offered is absurd. But that's not all. Some adventurers are even being paid in advance, and because of this, many are taking the money and fleeing instead of fighting. So Naru frustratedly remarks that they should stop paying adventurers up front if they know this is happening. Then Lois quickly deduces that this must be Hanzo's doing, and Amherst confirms his suspicions. Marnell then turns to Lois, asking what he plans to do now, since this development is quite different from what they had originally planned. However, the bounty seems to be working to rally the adventurers, uniting them to protect the town from the monsters. Then Sieg skeptically wonders aloud if Handsome has orchestrated this on purpose, and Lois admits he isn't sure. However, he speculates that Handsome might have been preparing for this possibility for some time to be able to pay such large sums on short notice. Ralma, who unexpectedly shows up, comments that it feels like someone had foreseen this entire situation. The group is surprised to see her, as they had thought she already left. Lois then asks if she anticipated this scenario, and Ralma looks puzzled, asking which situation he means. Lois explains that he's talking about the mass exodus of monsters from the labyrinth, which he identifies as a phenomenon known as a labyrinth uprising. Amherst recalls hearing about this before and pulls out a book with a mention of it. She explains that a labyrinth uprising occurs when an overwhelming number of monsters pour out of a labyrinth, and in most cases, the phenomenon subsides within a day, but in rare instances, the influx of monsters can last for several days. And she grimly adds that towns or villages near labyrinths are often overrun by monsters during uprisings and are ultimately destroyed. Then she explains that the cause is an excess buildup of magic power within the labyrinth, and to end the uprising, all the monsters must be defeated, forcing the labyrinth to expend its magic power, creating more monsters until the energy is depleted. Amherst then recalls that adventurer guilds were originally established to manage the buildup of magic power within labyrinths and prevent events like labyrinth uprisings. Lara wonders how she could have forgotten such a critical historical fact, so Amherst explains that this knowledge is only briefly covered during training, and she also never encountered such a phenomenon in her lifetime. Ralma chimes in, pointing out that there hasn't been a labyrinth uprising in over a century, so this means the guild has been doing its job effectively, even if most of its staff were unaware of the role they were playing. But still, she argues that 100 years isn't such a long time for everyone to forget, and surely someone would have heard stories of a great-grandparent surviving a labyrinth uprising and insists that experienced adventurers should have some knowledge of it. Stieg agrees, and Marnell finds it strange that such an event is happening in their labyrinth. Lois shares the sentiment, noting that Marmot attracts the most adventurers in the region, which should result in a steady reduction of monsters in the labyrinth. Yet despite that, an overwhelming amount of magic power has built up to trigger an uprising. Ralma acknowledges that Lois' reasoning makes sense, but the fact remains that an uprising is unfolding right now, and they need a plan to address it. The scene then shifts to the adventurers in town working together to build barricades, and Naru questions whether all this preparation is truly necessary, so Lois explains that uprisings can last for days, and if that's the case here, the adventurers will be stretched thin. So the least they can do is prepare as much as possible. Their conversation is interrupted by Marnell's loud shouting nearby, and we see Keith and his group of young friends pleading with him to let them join the fight, and they're eager to help defend the town they call home. Marnell, however, firmly tells them they're too young and inexperienced to take part in a battle like this, but instead he reminds them that there are other crucial ways they can contribute. He explains that fighters need food, care for injuries, and efficient communication to stay organized, so he encourages them to take on roles as messengers, lookouts, or helpers for Mary in managing supplies. Keith and his friends agree, realizing they can still play an important role and head off to coordinate with Mary about food and other needs. Lois then walks up to Marnell, who reflects on how the two of them were just like these kids in their youth, and adds with a nostalgic tone that he wants the children to enjoy their childhood while they still can. But their conversation is cut short as the monsters breach the town. The adventurers, driven by the promise of a hefty payout, leap into action. Using carriages, they block the monsters' escape routes and launch a coordinated attack. Lois soon notices that mid-level monsters are already inside the town, and that shit makes him sad. But Ralma observes him quietly and suspects he's blaming himself for letting this happen, so she tells him to stop indulging in self-doubt, reminding him that none of them, not even her, have ever faced a labyrinth uprising before. So instead of brooding, she urges him to give it everything he's got. Lois takes her advice and refocuses on the fight. Amid the chaos, liches suddenly appear in the sky. Lara is stunned to see them not only active in broad daylight, but also speaking. Sieg speculates that they may have mutated, like the other monsters, all of whom seem fixated on killing the humans. Ralma then hurls her signature fireball at the liches, giving the group an opening to charge the enemy lines. But as the battle wears on, Ralma grows exhausted and steps back to rest. Lois, noticing her retreat, warns that there are still many monsters left and reinforcements are nowhere in sight, but Ralma is firm in her decision. Moments later, more monsters swarm the area, prompting Naru to plead with Ralma to keep providing magical support, but she is drained and refuses. So with no other choice, Sieg and Lois take the front lines, carving through the monsters one by one. However, Sieg slips on something mid-fight, leaving him vulnerable to an approaching monster. And just as it seems all hope is lost, Ronaldo makes a dramatic entrance, cutting down the monsters near C in a single decisive strike. Ronaldo greets the group warmly, relieved to see Naru and Lois alive. Lyra, watching the exchange, is surprised that he knows them. So Naru explains that Ronaldo once trained her in swordsmanship, but Ronaldo says that he only gave her a few lessons because martial arts were her true strength. Then with a teasing smile, he adds that she was still better than our incompetent Lois. Lois, clearly used to this jab, casually replies that he also trained under Ronaldo, and that surprises Lyra, who hadn't known that C and Lois were fellow apprentices under the same master. Ronaldo, however, cuts the conversation short, saying he'd love to catch up, but that dealing with the monsters is the priority for now. Ronaldo then charges into battle, tearing through monsters like they're worthless scraps, leaving Marnell to gape and ask who this guy even is. So Ralma explains he's an exceptional swordsman and shares that the two of them used to adventure together when Lois was training with them. But as they talk, Handsome suddenly appears, stepping out of some kind of portal, and tells Ralma that Mist wants to see her. Ralma is stunned and recognizes the spell as a lost art, and finally understands why Mist had been impossible to track down. She agrees to go with him, confident that Ronaldo can handle things in her absence. Lois, seeing the opportunity, asks to go along, mentioning that he has questions for the guild branch manager. Handsome agrees, adding that Mist requested Naru as well, and then the four of them step into the portal. They reappear in a long hallway, and as they walk, Naru nervously asks why Handsome included her. Lois isn't sure, but he reassures her by vowing to protect her. But Ralma interjects, warning that Mist is far too powerful, even for her, so she hopes Lois won't do anything stupid. They finally reach their destination and come face to face with Mist, but without hesitation, Ralma furiously attacks him with a fireball. But we see that Mist remains completely unharmed, standing with an unshaken calm. As the air settles, they see Mist as an elf, and Ralma explains he's from a race that lost the gods' favor long ago and is likely their last surviving member. Mist, seemingly amused by Ralma's outburst, remarks that she hasn't changed a bit over the years. And then he asks if this is how she greets her master, leaving Lois stunned as he realizes that this old dude is Ralma's master. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.